Taking your calls at 415-808-0810. 808810 is the number. Chime in on Twitter, too, at Matt Ray Talk, or on the KGO Facebook page, too. Any narcissists that you work with, and do you look over and maybe they're taking selfies? Maybe they're posting all about themselves on the social media, showing you pictures of themselves, and you look over and you think, how in the heck did you get the job in the first place? That brings us to our guest. She's Gail Goodman. The website is phoneteacher.com. Gail, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Not that you're a narcissist, but you're going to help us figure this out. This new, I don't know if you are, Gail. This new study says narcissists perform better in job interviews. Why is that? How is that?
Oh, it's so totally obvious. The best thing to do in a job interview is talk about yourself and say how wonderful you are, and too many people that might be more talented or better fit for the job may not know how to come out from under their own rock when it comes to their ego. And a narcissist is just happy to tell you all day how wonderful he or she is. So they tend to shine, and the interview is about them, which is their favorite subject. So when I saw that, I just thought, well, it seems obvious to me. The problem is those people become extremely difficult to work with. As you mentioned, that they're often just horrible coworkers.
Well, that was my next question. I mean, I would imagine outside of taking selfies, this is the only scenario in which being a narcissist might be a good thing.
You're talking to somebody, ironically, who worked with an entire psychiatric unit of borderline narcissistic personality disorder for many, many years ago, for a couple of years of my life. And the syndrome actually, the funniest part about it, because I was thinking about that, is narcissists often become CEOs, which is kind of stunning to the rest of us. But borderline personality disorder, even though it's a difficult personality to deal with, these are the true Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hydes. One minute they're your best friend, the next minute they're having a rage attack because they can't find their stapler and they think you moved it. That's really what narcissistic borderlines are about. And the problem is that they also are highly intelligent.
So
and they rise up the ladder.
Yeah, I would imagine a lot of narcissists become politicians too then. I mean, you mentioned the intelligence factor, but outside of that.
We tend to belittle our politicians because it's so much fun to do on TV, but it is very hard to know the issues. You have to be on top of the issues. Yes, you have a full staff. It does require a certain amount of intelligence to be a politician, but it also creates a narcissistic, pardon my French, cesspool, because all of them are narcissists. And how do you get anything moving forward? Because you have to believe you should be the leader of your Congress, your congressional district, your state if you're a senator, and obviously the belief is that most presidents are narcissistic.
Yeah. Well, I guess my next question is how do I mean, you just answered the question how they perform in the workplace. If they get past that interview, they obviously do quite well.
They can. They can be your best friend at work. The problem is that the littlest slight, and they can go into either a narcissistic rage, which some of us unfortunately have been around, or they pull away from you and withdraw their friendship, and they make you feel really, really, really terrible. So it's that pendulum swinging which makes people very, very crazy being around them.
Yeah, give us a call if you work around somebody like that. We won't use your name on the air. 415-808-0810 is the number, 808810. Our guest is Gail Goodman. She's the communications expert. Phoneteacher.com is the website. A new study says narcissists perform better in job interviews, but how do they stack up in the workplace? So, Gail, if I'm conducting interviews, how do I see past this?
It's hard. Because an interview is a snapshot in time. These are very charming people. That's the other thing about narcissism, is one of the things that goes along with it is a tremendous amount of charm. And most people want to be charmed. There's no question that we like to be with charming people. The challenge with all interviews is it's a moment in time. It's not long enough to really get to know somebody. When I advise young people who are dating and starting to get serious because they're in their 20s and 30s, my feeling is you don't marry anybody you don't know for a year and a half, because you need to see that person in a lot of different situations. There's no way for an interviewer to know enough. And, of course, you know that everybody's references are the people that are going to say nice things about them.
Sure.
I think one of the advantages is an interviewer who's smart knows that if a resume shows too much job changing, there's got to be a red flag. And that often is the sign of a narcissist, because they don't get along, they pick up and leave, they're wrong, I need a better job, somebody will appreciate me, and you see this pattern of a lot of jobs in a short period of time.
So what's the real takeaway of this? I mean, I guess those of us that maybe don't have these narcissistic characteristics or and I'm not saying I don't, I mean, I'm sure I do. But what about those who aren't? I mean, they could probably take something away from this in that, maybe be a little more confident in yourself when you go into these job interviews.
Or fake it.
Or fake it.
If you're not genuinely confident, and I do this all the time when I teach people how to talk to people on the phone, you have to practice, you have to role play. And the ironic thing about how the brain works is that if you fake a certain behavior long enough, your brain starts to own it. So if you practice doing interviews in a way that you come across much more self-confident, and you have to try to turn on the charm. It depends on the job, of course. If you're in sales, charm is important. If you're an actuary, it may not be. But the fact is that in order to get the job, you have to have some kind of a rapport with the interviewer. Now, good interviewers know that the personality type for certain jobs is not going to be as outgoing and charming as the person who's going to be in your sales department.
Yeah.
So that part of it has a lot to do with how you behave depending on the job you're looking for. But hopefully there are people in your life that you can role play with, and they can give you honest feedback. You're coming across disinterested in the job because you're not smiling enough, or you're not keeping your head up and making eye contact and looking like you're really listening.
Our guest is Gail Goodman. She's a communications expert. The website is phoneteacher.com. Gail, I want to get you to hold on because I'm going to switch up topics here since I do have you on the line. You are a communications expert. And you've been on the show before, and we've talked about millennials and their use of their mobile communications devices. I want to talk about this new study that says they're basically not even using voicemail anymore. They don't care if somebody calls you or not. So I want to get into that with you if I could get you to hold on.
Okay.
Gail Goodman's our guest. Phoneteacher.com is the website. KGO News Time is 12:45.
As you head to work in the morning, as you head home in the evening, and during your Bay Area weekend, get the latest traffic updates on KGO.
Our guest this hour, Gail Goodman. She's a communications expert. The website is phoneteacher.com. Probably one of my favorite guests, Gail. I really appreciate your time. We talk a lot about millennials when you come on, and now we're finding out that they basically don't want anything to do with voicemail anymore. They basically shy away from voicemail. It's basically obsolete to them. Is that right?
Correct. It's not in their repertoire, just like they're not too fond of email either.
What is this doing? I mean, what is this doing to not only them, but us, who maybe still believe in email and leaving an occasional voicemail?
It depends on who's more invested in the relationship. So, for example, my mother, who wants to communicate with her granddaughter, who is 27, she will text her because she knows if I call her, she won't pick up. If I leave her a voicemail, she'll never listen to it. And if I send her an email, she probably won't open it. So she wants to communicate with her, so she's learned how to text. And occasionally my niece will call my mother. But I think it's important to know that they communicate this way among themselves, and until you start jumping into different generations, they don't care. The problem is when they move into a job, which you and I have discussed more than once. When you move into a job and you've got multiple generations, you've got customers who need to be talked to on the phone and can't be texted, then you have to make sure that people are willing to be trained in these skills that they may not want to use in their personal life, but it's kind of like tough noogies. This company does leave voicemails. This company does communicate by phone. Yes, we email our clients, and honestly, we don't text them.
Wow. You mentioned something there. You said we have to train them. That just seems bizarre to me. I'm on kind of the cusp of this. I have a voicemail that says, the easiest way to get a hold of me, leave a voicemail, but the easiest way to get a hold of me is via email. And I text constantly. All of my relatives, with the exception of maybe my 90-year-old grandfather. That's about it. But it seemed when you said we have to train them, I mean, are companies literally having to sit these millennials down and pushing them through a course?
Depends on the company. If training is not in your budget, it's not in your repertoire, you assume people walk in with certain kind of basic customer service skills, then it becomes, back to what we were saying before the break, the interviewer who is your recruiter has to make sure that they know when somebody comes in and says, oh, yeah, I'll talk to people on the phone, that they're not lying. Because then they walk in and they don't want to use the communication systems that we insist on. That becomes a recruiting issue. I mean, it's the same thing in sales. You can say that you're willing to do certain things like prospect and make calls and do all kinds of things that are required, and then when ultimately you can't, when I get brought in to do training, sometimes I turn to the managers and I say, who recruited this person? And that's when we get to you can't, you could put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig.
Yeah.
So that becomes the problem is you can't start in the middle of the job. You have to start with the recruiting process, then you have to have training. I think, but I'm coming from a trainer's point of view, Matt.
Sure.
I think there are not enough companies that believe they need to train people who come into their companies, that people need to be like fully wrapped, packaged, and ready to go. Not realistic anymore.
Is it two questions here? First of all, is there some kind of anxiety amongst the millennials who I mean, if they get a voicemail, and are they just whatever, or do they get anxious that they would actually have to answer this thing? And two, what should we do in the home as parents to kind of curb this before they get out into the job force?
It's like training your children to shake people's hands. It's like training them to say thank you, to sit quietly in a restaurant when they're 4 or 5 years old so that they have good manners at 17. When you have a child that's going into the workforce, you have to make sure that the basic communication skills that might be assumed actually are in their repertoire, or they may not find themselves able to get a job. The challenge also, really to get off into another whole radio show again, they want to not have that job anyway. They don't want to be on a customer service level where they have to call people and leave voicemails. They want to be running the company.
Yeah.
And that's a bigger problem that people are having is the millennials come into the interview saying, what are you going to do for me, as opposed to what can I do to serve you?
Oh, I'm so glad I work for myself.
That's a very big generational thing. They don't get anxious, by the way, about voicemails because they ignore them. You can't get anxious about something that you don't see on your radar screen.
Right. Well, I would imagine there's a level of anxiety, though, if they've never picked up a voicemail before, to go into the workplace and your boss says you have to answer the phone, you have to return voicemails. If they have no idea what they're doing, I would imagine there's a certain level of anxiety.
I think they know how. I think in their personal life on their smartphones, they just ignore that whole feature. When you go into any company, they have to teach you how to use the voicemail system. Some of them are so complicated. It's unbelievable. I know there are times even now when somebody says, I'm going to transfer you if I drop you. Here's the number. Yeah. I mean, the systems are getting even more complex for those of us who grew up with regular dial phones all along. The problem is not that they can't do it. It's that it's almost like having a blind spot.
Yeah.
It's not in there. It's not something they do. It's like asking me to do, an appendectomy.
So do you see
the scalpel in my hand? I don't know what to do.
Right. So do you see, as one generation of the workforce starts to phase out, do you see this becoming the norm where we just stop? I have it on my voicemail. I call people and they have it on their voicemail. Hey, the easiest way to get a hold of me is to leave an email. Do you see voicemails eventually just being phased out? Do you see picking up the phone? No?
No, because there's too many situations where there isn't a personal relationship in commerce.
I see.
And that's the way that we communicate. It's like email became popular, and that's a good thing. Sometimes people have to talk to a person. So you have to have a human contact system. The only thing left right now is the phone, because a lot of people don't want to Skype with their clients, because clients don't want to be, I don't want to be on a camera to a person that I'm yelling at Verizon or wherever.
Sure.
I'm using Verizon because they happen to have tremendous phone people. But I don't want to Skype to people that I do commerce with. So I think Skyping may not ever become as much the norm as a phone is. And there's always got to be a way to talk to a human being. Some things just can't be resolved by email.
My engineer just chimed in, Ryan Hilton. He said in my ear he has over 200 voicemails. 200 voicemails that he hasn't checked. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, who the hell keeps calling you? My dad adapted to text because of because of my sister, and he wanted an easier way to get a hold of me. So eventually, later on in his life, he would just text us and say, "Hey, how's it going?" or "I'm going to call you on Sunday." But he eventually gave up calling. I'm wondering, with Ryan here, 200 voice, who the hell keeps calling him? Haven't they learned that he's not going to answer the phone or call him back?
Well, it depends on the job that you have. In some cases, not listening to your voicemails is going to be deadly. In other cases,
right,
your attitude is they'll find me in another way.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen in the future. If I knew that, I get paid a lot more money than I do. I think that's
Sure.
way above my pay raise. But I think we're going to move into new ways of communicating like we did now. I know that when I was a little girl, long distance was a big deal.
Yeah,
And so
yeah.
there's been a real fast evolution during my generation. I think the thing I worry about now is the tension between the generations, because I read a lot about that, where people won't communicate with each other because they prefer different methodologies, and they're literally in the same space. I'm more worried about that. That
Yeah.
creates real problems in a company. Over time, the culture adapts to the new thing. I mean, we all do drive cars. We don't ride horses anymore.
Sure.
The farriers didn't like that. Good for the car industry, not good for the blacksmiths.
Right.
But as we move into new methods of communication, some things are going to drop off, but nothing ever will replace the human voice.
Yeah. Gail Goodman's our guest. She's a communications expert. The website is phoneteacher.com. Gail, we appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me.
Chime in on Twitter at Matt Ray Talk. And the mobile app, you can take KGO everywhere you go by downloading it from your app store on your mobile device, or you can head on over to KGOradio.com and get it that way. That's also where we are streaming.